how light is related to our lives, our biology, as well as introducing some various forms of light therapy. I've gotten I've gotten really into light therapy the last 6 months or so, and it's a fascinating, quite deep topic. So I wanted to share some of it with you guys. Michael, we can be in a cult if you want. So I want to get started with just a basic introduction to light. I'm glad I can see the chat. This is great. Just to give you some background of the things we're going to talk today, there's actually quite a bit of background in here to explain how, like, the mechanism behind light therapies. When I say light, I'm not just referring to visible light, so what we think of as light, what our eyes can perceive. Light is a particular band of frequencies in the huge electromagnetic spectrum. So I have here, most generally, you'll see it referred to as about 400 to 700 nanometers is the wavelength of light. So you can see in the photo here, this is a picture of one cycle of a photon, basically one full wavelength. So it goes. There's electric and magnetic field components. This is kind of heady for some of you, but we'll get through it quickly, I promise. And this is one full cycle. It goes up. It goes negative. This doesn't have to do with space. This just has to do with intensity. And that's one full cycle. So that length would be 400 to 700 nanometers. That's what we think of as visible light. It's photons in that with that wavelength, or 400 to 800 trillion hertz, which means cycles per second. So it goes through that many cycles, it goes up and down 400 to 800 trillion times every second. That's just visible light. When I refer to light, I'm going to be referring really to the entire electromagnetic spectrum. I also may use the term EMF, which is just electromagnetic field, a short term for any electromagnetic waves within the spectrum. So the spectrum starts. This is really backwards in the way that I think of it. So if you start on the right side, long radio waves, this starts off at zero hertz, this side of the spectrum. So, you know, your first line would be like, this is really 1 hertz, so 1 cycle per second, all the way to, you know, higher numbers than you could really imagine, cycles per second. And light is kind of there 2/3 of the way up the spectrum. That's all we can see, but there are animals that can see ultraviolet light or even into the infrared part of the spectrum. So infrared is below light, longer wavelengths. UV is at the higher end of our spectrum, ultraviolet beyond violet. That's at that's higher frequency and then decreasing wavelengths. Don't have to get into it much, but light is just a small fraction of this, and this whole spectrum is incredibly important for not just like our technology and the things that we use nowadays, but for biology in its truest form as well. I want to introduce to you a topic, or a subject called Schumann resonance. It's the natural electromagnetic field of our ionosphere. It's generated and excited by lightning strikes all throughout the Earth's cavity in our atmosphere. It's kind of like the lower part of our atmosphere is ringing in a sense, ringing with light or electromagnetic waves. And these are really, really low frequencies. So the biggest spike you'll see here, and the number most commonly referred to as the Schumann resonance, is 7.83 hertz, 7.83 cycles per second. And then there's the resonant frequencies above that in multiples. It's basically like if you cut the wave in half, and waves will ring. I won't get into resonant waves, but when you have like a sound wave, you'll have in a cavity, you'll have resonant waves appearing on top of that at different intervals, so ×2, ×3, and those are the numbers that you see above the 7.83 there. What's interesting about, oh, actually before that, so you see a huge spike there at 50 hertz. That is from the combined radiation emanating from electric power grids around the globe. So that didn't exist, 500 years ago. There was no spike there at 50. We were just all kind of basking in the Earth's natural Schumann resonance. And there are things like solar flares that can cause disturbances in that and cause outbreaks of different illnesses around the world too. But you can see just how extensive that and sharp that line is there that our power grid has caused in the Earth. I think that's pretty telling. In the absence of Schumann resonance, animals degrade quickly into disease states. So there were experiments done in the late 60s on this, some on hamsters. A Faraday cage is something that blocks out all surrounding EMFs, so they can block out the Schumann resonance and basically shield them from all waves, and then they can input waves of their choosing into the setup. And they were able to prevent hibernation, instigate hibernation, basically wake the hamsters up on command. And when they introduced specific frequencies to replicate summer, the hamsters woke up and ran around like crazy, like they had to prepare for something. Pretty interesting stuff. Someone else did some studies in the late 60s on humans where they built these underground rooms shielded from light and sound, and one was also shielded from EMFs. And subjects in the room shielded from the Earth's natural EMFs suffered from like a whole host of negative conditions, including insomnia and headaches and anxiety and irritability, and their biological rhythms were off. But when they introduced frequencies around 10 hertz into the system near the Schumann resonance, their problems quickly subsided. I'll talk a little bit about sunlight because it's arguably the most common form of light that we think of, and not just visible light. It also carries non-visible light as well that's just really important to our health. Circadian rhythm. Are you guys familiar with circadian rhythm? I'll give you a couple seconds because I don't have a ton of time. Circadian rhythm is our natural, 24-hour or so biological clock. Cool, some yeses. And sun exposure is super important for that. You'll see I have the chart at the top here is a graphing of the red line is melatonin, which is related to regulating sleep, and it's the highest. It's at its highest concentrations in your body when you're sleeping, and you'll see it suppressed during the day when there's sunlight. And then cortisol, which is your stress hormone, or it promotes alertness, spikes in the morning, and provides you energy throughout the day. All of these things also signal a cascade of other things in your body and keep everything timed and running well. When your circadian rhythm's messed up and you have things like insomnia, it leads to a ton of issues. What triggers this, especially this melatonin curve, is something called melanopsin. So in your eye, I'm sure you're all familiar with rods and cones, and that we have photoreceptors for 3 different colors. Some of us 4 different colors, but most of us 3 different colors: blue, green, and red. And you can see them at the bottom there, blue, green, and red. But we also have intrinsically photoreceptive retinal ganglion cells, or IPRCGs, which are photoreceptors in our eyes that don't play a role in our vision, or at least not directly in our awareness of light through our vision. But these are tied to centers of the brain responsible for melatonin production and circadian rhythm and managing hormones. And it's particularly sensitive to blue light. This is how blue light from screens can interfere with your sleep at night. It's through the IPRCGs and triggering melanops and your non-visual photoreceptor. Infrared light from the sun. So in this little picture here, you'll see in the very back of it is the spectrum of sunlight. So it starts in the UV range, goes through violet, blue, not really violet colors, but violet, blue, green, all the way down to red, and then infrared is the darker red color that you see there. Obviously, infrared you wouldn't be able to see, but this is an illustration of it. And infrared light is really important for our health as well. It's something we naturally get from the sun. You know, we've evolved with infrared light. Infrared light is known for the heat that it produces. Incandescent bulbs, which are being phased out. The reason for the phasing out is because there's wasted energy due to heat, which is not the most logical argument, especially in colder climates, because the heat actually reduces your energy. The heat from the light reduces your energy needs to heat facilities in the winter. And incandescent bulbs, they replicate the sun's spectrum a lot more, especially in those infrared in the infrared spectrum, which is really important to our health. You'll see incandescent is the one that rises and has a lot of that dark red, the infrared spectrum there. Behind that is LEDs. The LEDs will vary. There's all different kinds of LEDs. LEDs are super versatile, but it will depend. There are cooler LEDs with more blues. There are warmer LEDs, but they generally don't. They don't have that heat. They don't have the infrared spectrum either. But fluorescent lights, which you can see in the front, are arguably the worst for our health. Not only do they have a really uneven spectrum and don't contain a lot of the important light that we need, but they have really sharp spikes in certain frequencies, and this is because of the mercury and other elements used to create that lighting source. I won't go too into that. If you're interested in more of these things, we can always talk about it. I'm gonna have a hard time getting through everything, so if you have questions, let me know. I will answer them throughout. But there's always a lot more to go into here. Infrared light and some other frequencies as well, but primarily infrared light has been identified in what's called photobiomodulation. A woman named Tina Carew discovered this. Does everyone know what mitochondria are? So mitochondria are referred to as the powerhouse of our cells. They produce energy for our cells. There's an enzyme in the electron transport chain, the powerhouse of the cell. There you go, Kelsey. Which is the process that provides us cellular energy, and it can receive infrared light and some other wavelengths. There's a chart that I can show you, but I didn't put it in here because I didn't have room. And actually improve cellular energy production. That enzyme's able to absorb that light and improve the process. I'll talk more about photobiomodulation a couple times in the presentation, but I wanted to introduce it here related to the sun. Infrared light can also has a charging effect on water. So I'm going to talk a lot about water too, because it's really related to EMFs and is basically the biological interface for a lot of how EMFs affect us. Gerald Pollack of the University of Washington is a great example of structured water research. So near hydrophilic surfaces that like water, what he calls it EZ water, basically stacks up in planes from the surface. It's highly structured water, and it's a totally different form than just regular bulk water that you'd find in a stream or something. Although water is like way more complicated than most people think it is. This is like biological water is basically all structured water because of how close it is to these hydrophilic surfaces in our body. And every cell has a charge that's created by this water structure, which helps keep proper cell spacing and health. The structure of water inside the cells too, in the cytoplasm, helps guide a whole host of things, including that charge gradient, and a lot of the interactions that are happening inside the cell. We'll talk a little bit more about that later too. Some other effects from sunlight. There's some really interesting new research into melanin and how it can produce energy. UVB light is essential for vitamin D production. And the vitamin D that you get from sunlight is water soluble. And there's some other notes on here. There's like it produces oxidation of sulfate and other things that are nitric oxide production, oxidation of cholesterol and sulfur, which have antioxidant properties in the body, and it lasts longer in the system than like a D3 supplement will. How am I doing on time? I'm gonna quickly talk about this. I was gonna skip it and then go back to it if we had time, but I'll quickly talk about it because it's a pretty interesting story. There was this guy in the early 20th century called Raymond Rife. He was a bacteriologist. His big claim to fame was that he developed a universal prismatic microscope. This microscope, what was special about it is that he was able to magnify things similar to today's electron microscopes, but he didn't have to kill the samples that he was looking at to achieve that magnification. It was really, really hard to focus this microscope, and it was extraordinarily complicated, but it allowed him to look at living microorganisms, something that like really can't even be done today. And he observed these microorganisms and had another device that, and this is where the Rife frequencies come in. He I don't want to say blasted because it was pretty low level, but he generated EMFs and found that each microorganism had a resonant EMF that could be used to disable it or kill it. A resonant frequency would be kind of like an opera singer breaking glass. So if the opera singer hits the resonant frequency of glass, it causes the glass is able to absorb that energy, and it compounds because it's resonant, and then it breaks. So this is just like if you have two identical tuning forks in a room and you hit one, the other one will start to vibrate because it's able to absorb that energy because it's the same frequency, it's resonant. This is like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse too, if you're familiar with that. His discoveries were written about in Science Magazine and Smithsonian. One of the really interesting things that he did was there was a study conducted under the auspices of the University of Southern California in 1934, and he began. There were 16 terminally ill cancer patients. Within a certain time period, he cured 14 of them, and then made some adjustments, and then had 100% cure rate for all of these cancer patients using his device that emitted electromagnetic frequencies through plasma. I don't want to get into the specifics. It's really complicated, and it's a lot of this. Well, actually, we'll get to his legacy in a second. But really, really interesting stuff. According to Smithsonian's 1944 annual report, I want to read this. I went and looked at the Smithsonian annual report from their archives myself. And I quote, under the universal microscope, disease organisms such as those of tuberculosis, cancer, sarcoma, streptococcus, typhoid, staphylococcus, leprosy, hoof and mouth disease, and many others may be observed to succumb when exposed to certain lethal frequencies, those resonant frequencies I talked about, coordinated with the particular frequencies peculiar to each individual organism and directed upon them by rays covering a wide range of waves. The report is really detailed and talks about other scientists who confirmed his work. It's really, really interesting. I have a link to it in the presentation if you want to check it out. His legacy. His work is now largely discredited, especially by the medical community. If this stuff worked, if this stuff really does work, then there's a lot of business interests that would be extremely hurt by it. He was vilified by the American Medical Association. Much of his work was destroyed. I think one of his labs was burned. And his methods and treatments were forbidden from being performed, even though they didn't have any negative side effects. There are still people that make Rife machines nowadays, but a lot of them aren't built the way that his was built. So it's there's a lot of stuff you're going to find out there that really isn't going to work. But there are some people doing some interesting work with Rife frequencies. For now, we can't truly know the realities of the story, but it's really interesting. All right, now I'm gonna get into the really complicated stuff for a second, and then I promise you, it will get lighter from there. I've been really diving into newer science on the biology of light, and this is where water really comes into play too. So there are deeper theories about how different spectra of light can organize the structure of water in and around our cells that I talked about before, as well as how light underlies the communication for other biological processes. The way that we use electromagnetic waves in communications for radio broadcasts or wireless communications. So for radio, there's a carrier frequency. That's the frequency you tune into on your radio. And the way that they achieve the sounds coming through is they modulate those waves using fractals. So the wave still generally oscillates at a particular frequency, but within those frequencies, if you zoom in further and further, the wave is modulated in fractal or self-similar patterns. If you zoom in on that, you can carry an immense amount of information using these fractal waves. Modern cell phones, they've discovered a way to build fractal antennas to better read this fractal information from electromagnetic waves that are coming in. But the point is that there's an immense amount of information that can be carried within electromagnetic waves. So it's not just the up and down. They can be highly complex. And you'll see some examples of water structure that has fractal patterns and is really interesting. It's more visual. So some of the light therapies that I'll introduce a little later operate under the belief that our bodies use information encoded in light to regulate our biological processes and even enhance spiritual connection and awareness. Mei-Wan Ho, you'll see her a couple times. I have her latest book, but I haven't gotten through it too much. And Emilio Del Giudice, they've focused on quantum effects of structured water acting as liquid crystals in the body. So this picture here is like Mei-Wan Ho's. She wasn't really interested in all this stuff, but she was looking at a fruit fly larva and imaging it with light while it was living, and found a particular angle where all of these different colors emerged, what's called birefringence. So it's basically like a living prism in a way. And this could only happen if the whole organism has coherence and has like has a coherent structured water within it, liquid crystal water. So water is a liquid crystal. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. You'll see a little bit more of that on the next slide. But basically, like a prism would on that cover image, it's splitting the light waves and creating all these beautiful colors. And that, like, she became obsessed with the structured water in the body and liquid crystals, and these large coherence domains that water creates, that provide perfectly efficient energy transformation and communication at much lower at sub levels beneath protein signaling and electrical nerve impulses, and this provides a method for the influence of light on the body. There's other people who have done research into looking at this from a QED lens to understand how these water structures affect long-range communications via EMFs as well. I want to do a sidebar on water for a second. So this colored graphic is a basic representation of a water molecule. What's interesting about water is it's a dipole. It carries opposite charges. So the oxygen has a charge of -2, and each hydrogen atom has a positive charge. It allows for really interesting things to happen in how it bonds with itself and can create all these structures. This second image with all the hexagons is from Gerald Pollack's book in determining this structured water near hydrophilic surfaces. What's interesting about this structure that they found, if you look on the next one, if you count the charges in each hexagon ring, it doesn't balance out. So the positive and negative charges don't balance out. You have a net charge of -1, which means within this lattice, for each hexagon you have, there's a free charge of -1 that can be used by the whole system. So it's basically a coherent system where all these free charges can move about and be used in any way. Electrons are intrinsically related to EMFs, and if you look into QED and stuff, with electron motion and things like that, it's described in terms of virtual photons and then photons that come into existence, and it gets really complicated. But the takeaway is that this net charge difference enables structure to be influenced by EMFs. This is an example of a structured water molecule. So you can kind of see in a three-dimensional sense these hexagons and how something like that might be created. And like the fractal patterns too. So if you zoom in, you'd get a self-similar pattern. These other images are of I think electron microscopes of water encased proteins in different shapes. I threw a quote on here by Albert Szent-Györgyi, who was the Nobel laureate in medicine in 1937. 37, which is crazy. Since the molecular structure of water is the essence of life, the man who can control that structure in cellular systems will change the world. He was way ahead of his time. This is just another liquid crystal that I thought was really interesting. Molecule signaling and water memory. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how proteins and other molecules in the body can actually play the reverse role. So it's not just water structure playing a role on the molecules. The molecules can emit EMFs to interact with the structured water as well. So all these people have observed water's ability to absorb and store information from electromagnetic frequencies. This is the mechanism behind homeopathy. If you're interested in that, we can talk about that, or you can look more into it. Emitted frequencies create structures in the water that guide the formation and interaction of other molecules then. We can also, this is like kind of a sidebar, but we can also physically store emotional experiences in the water structure of our body, particularly in our fascia, which connects everything in our body. And there are therapeutic fields focused on body work and aimed at releasing these experiences and memories in our bodies. So this is really interesting. This is from a paper that I was reading. Yes, I download scientific papers and read them. I want to read the quote. Recently, a group led by Luc Montagnier. Luc Montagnier won a Nobel Prize for first identifying HIV. He's a virologist. Has reported that some bacterial and viral DNA sequences have been found to induce low-frequency electromagnetic waves in high aqueous solutions, just like water with stuff in it. These waves are able to imprint pure water contained in nearby vessels so that similar sequences are able to grow up when the appropriate component molecules are poured into the liquid. So there were proteins in this aqueous solution, and they were able to emit low-frequency electromagnetic waves that imprinted structures on pure water in a nearby vessel, so that when the components of those molecules were added to that vessel, those sequences, those proteins were able to grow. So the structure that was imprinted on the water determined how things were going to grow in that medium. DNA. DNA, there's like a ton of research on structured water and DNA and EMFs in DNA. Photobiomodulation, which I talked about before, in the mitochondria. It can regulate gene expression through what's called mitochondrial retrograde signaling. So you usually think of like DNA controlling everything, but there are other things that go on in the cell that can influence which genes are expressed, and we kind of know that through like environmental factors. If you're breathing in smog all day, like yeah, the terrain of your body, your environment is getting messed up, and that's going to change your gene expression. DNA, as you'll see more in a second, also emits EMFs. I probably meant to add something else there, but I don't remember. So it's thought that water structure guides processes related to DNA, including its own replication, protein synthesis, and even that expression. When proteins are created, they fold into a specific shape right after they're synthesized, and that can only be really guided by EMFs and the structured water around the protein. Proteins can also have very similar chemical makeups, but it's the shape that it folds into that determines its function, which is interesting. So there's lots of thoughts about how that shape is determined related to EMFs and structured water. Commonality in many diseases is a breakdown of the structure of water and charge around our cells. So in all of cancer, there's a breakdown in those cells of the structure of the water and subsequently the charge of those cells. This is a long quote that I want to talk about related to DNA in another book that I'm reading. Today we know that the DNA strand is surrounded and encased by layers of structured water, and that it has a pillar of structured water layers through its central column. We also know that it is the relationship between DNA and the structured water surrounding it that is responsible for DNA's coiling, the conduction of lightning-fast resonant frequency communications, the coherency of its electromagnetic field, and even its genetic information. The level to which water conducts and supports the DNA and its corresponding electromagnetic field is directly related to the geometric complexity of its structure. Additionally, the structure of water surrounding proteins and DNA determines the ultimate expression of shape that protein or DNA exhibits, which I just kind of talked about. The higher the complexity of the structure, the stronger the electromagnetic field, which indicates higher energy potential and information transfer, as well as greater efficiency and cellular function. Biophotons. There's another ICEP reference in here. So biophotons have been studied starting in the 1920s, working with plants. There's a famous onion bulb experiment where one one onion communicated through electromagnetic frequencies, I think in the UV spectrum, to another plant to grow in a certain way. I don't remember the details of it right now, but you could look it up. Fritz Albert Popp really is like the pioneer of biophotons, especially within humans. He's from Uni Marburg. Yeah, Uni Marburg. That's not the, there's another reference to Uni Marburg in here too. He first noticed that certain carcinogens acted as light scramblers in biological systems, taking in and altering certain wavelengths. Which is that, I mean, that's pretty weighted there, but I won't get into it too much. He indicated a primary source of biophoton emissions to be the DNA. So that's DNA emitting EMFs. Biophoton emissions follow set patterns, creating biological rhythms and rhythms in tune with cyclical patterns in our universe like day and night. Species absorb biophotons from each other, as well as light from the environment. This is obvious in how plants move towards solar photons. We just think like, oh, plants move towards the sun, but it's really them responding to electromagnetic fields, the solar photons from the sun. EMFs in classical Chinese medicine. So there's a really interesting book I'm reading called Invisible Rainbow by Changlin Zhang, or I read it. So his concept is that light influences standing electromagnetic waves within our bodies that correspond to the acupuncture meridians of classical Chinese medicine. This falls in line with there's an extensive practice of electroacupuncture in Europe where you can measure the electrical resistance and electric potential of certain areas on the skin. Not everyone has the same acupuncture points. They can vary to some extent, which makes sense if they're standing electromagnetic waves. So the image here is a simple example of two-dimensional of standing waves. So this is just in like a metal box, a rectangular plate, the two-dimensional standing waves that are created by different frequencies. So the ones in column A, it's the frequency vibrating this plate, and those are the wave patterns that form these standing. Those are the wave pattern, the standing waveform patterns. On B, there was just one dot, a hole drilled into the plate, and the same frequency pumped into it, and you can see how much the standing wave pattern changes. It's like a basic illustration of what's going on during acupuncture. You're basically creating this point for the wave to that the wave interacts with, and altering that standing wave pattern. I mean, the complexity of it in the human body is incredible. And if you're interested, I can tell you more about the book. Oh, that's Hans-Jürgen Stockmann, his research, and that's another Uni Marburg guy, the rectangular plate. Now we can get into light therapy. I thank you all for bearing with me through that. I know that was probably a lot. You guys were very silent for a long time. Oh, someone's friend used a Rife machine to cure her Lyme disease. That's awesome. Types of light therapy. Bright light therapy. Actually, John Ott, which is kind of a shout out to Jacob's presentation, who's a photographer, started a company in 1989 to promote full spectrum lighting for health purposes. This was previously used for what was called seasonal affective disorder, which isn't anymore, but it's now used year round for mental health primarily. Broad spectrum lighting for 30 minutes a day. You want to include certain blue or turquoise frequencies, but you want to avoid blue light hazard, which can cause retinal damage in certain frequencies as well. So sometimes turquoise is used included instead of some of those blue light frequencies, and it works pretty much just as well. This also acts on melanopsin. Light is more effective coming from above because the IPRCGs are more dense in the lower retina. So like the melanopsin is more concentrated in your lower retina. A 2006 study in JAMA Psychiatry showed that bright light is more effective than fluoxetine in people suffering major depressive disorders, or Prozac. Slightly contentious, but really interesting nonetheless. Photobiomodulation, our second light therapy. So here's the action spectrum peaks I was talking about. Most of these are in infrared, 820, 760, and then the deep reds, 680, and then red, 620. And then there's also a spike in violet at 400. These are what act on the mitochondria in the cell. I also use my red light in the morning at night to replicate the sun's red and infrared portion of the spectrum in morning at night. So when the sun is low in the horizon, it's passing through more of the atmosphere, which scatters the light more and produces more. It produces a red shift basically, and you have more red and infrared light at night, and you can see that in the sunset. This promotes like energy and cellular function, immune function, and healing too. Quicker healing for things. If I'm like really sore, I'll just like I have a red light panel. I didn't show you a picture of it, but I can show you if you're interested, and I'll put it on my skin if I'm sore or something like that, or if I hurt myself. Blue light, UV, and other dermatological applications. I have a friend in derm, and she actually listens to me when I talk about light therapies, because she's like, yeah, we use light for all sorts of things now. So this is a picture of blue light being used for neonatal jaundice. UV light can also be combined with photosensitizing agents to kill damaged cells. Blue light's also used to treat like a whole plethora of skin conditions. And red light is used to boost collagen production. That has basically is the same effect on the mitochondria too. Photic entrainment or audio-visual entrainment, sometimes referred to as AVE. So the brain, as measured by EEGs, electroencephalograms, have run in certain frequencies. The electrical firing of your brainwave patterns, and we generally run from like 0 to 40-ish, even a little bit higher. And different ranges of these frequencies correlate to different states of being. So alpha, 8 to 12 hertz, corresponds to calm meditative states. Alpha and a little below that too, monks when they're meditating achieve these brainwave patterns. Beta, from roughly 15 to 30, is wakefulness. Theta, 4 to 7 hertz, is sleep, slower, slower cycles per second, fewer cycles per second. So photic entrainment uses pulsed light at these frequencies to entrain the brain to fire at those frequencies, to sync up with those frequencies, and can create these calm meditative states or energetic states. Gamma, which is higher, around 40 hertz, has shown benefit for memory and cognition and myelin sheath disorders, including and Alzheimer's. Studies are limited, but I've heard some really effective anecdotal studies of that and applications of that. I have glasses that I plug into my computer that I can modulate the light frequencies. This is also combined with sound too. Binaural beats or pulsing sound frequencies to add another layer of, that's the audio-visual part, to add another layer of entrainment. You can also use non-visual frequencies for entrainment too. So there's a whole thing called PEMF. You'll see like PEMF mats to help people sleep or to provide cellular energy or for healing. There's a bunch of uses for them. There's different things you can do with them. So I won't get into this too much. It's generally a lot of these run on entrainment, but also these pulsed electromagnetic frequencies can provide energy to different systems in the body. There's also different cells and systems use different frequencies in your body, and you can use similar wavelengths to affect and provide more energy to those specific systems. It's used for bone growth, pain, sleep, relaxation, faster recovery, and also to combat non-native EMFs, which are all around us all the time, from our computers, Wi-Fi, cell phones, smart home devices. We constantly have this NN EMF pollution. Magneto-infrared therapy, or MIL. This takes photobiomodulation to the next level, kind of combines it with PEMF, although it will also use magnetic fields that are not pulsed to amplify the effects of photobiomodulation. I've ordered a device, but it hasn't come in yet, from a company called Comra, Coherent Multiradiances. They use infrared light and magnetic fields for healing and regeneration, and also to focus other elements of the treatment modality. They include colored light as well, to increase the information available to our bodies, and inform systems like the endocrine system, which regulates like your flight or fight response. And their professional models include ultrasound, which speeds up the rate of healing, among other things. Now, color puncture. This is the last one I'll talk about. This is my favorite light therapy. It is an incredibly extensively researched chromotherapy system designed by a German named Peter Mandel. It combines acupuncture with colored light. So it uses things similar to the acupuncture meridians, as well as like a bunch of other esoteric healing modalities, and applies colored light. He's expanded it into this whole system he calls esogetics, esoteric and energetics, and does use things like low-level frequencies, sound, even some other things as well. There's like really extensive diagnostic techniques. So he uses this thing called Kirlian emission analysis. So these are examples of Kirlian photographs, which basically give you a sense of the electromagnetic output of different parts of your body, and they'll use fingers and toes. So this is at the top. This is normal. This is what it should look like. And then this is when someone's having an endocrine problem. You can see all the gaps in their fingers and stuff. So this is really the first practical use of measuring coherence in standing electromagnetic waves of the body that we talked about earlier in relation to acupuncture. These are just some more pictures of diagnostic systems. So they use iridology, reading of the iris. They'll read the tongue, the teeth. I mean, it's incredibly extensive. In the top left corner, you'll see what the different parts of the finger correlate to based on his study of almost 1 million case studies that he looked at to map what parts of the Kirlian emission analysis corresponded to in people's health and in health issues. Coherence is key to the holographic principle of esogetics, which says that every part of the body contains the information of the whole. So what makes a system coherent is the principle that all parts of the system are connected. So if you make a change somewhere, the whole system is influenced. So that's how you can, you saw how the standing waves on the rectangular plate were influenced when you just made a change in one spot. Coherence at the quantum level is responsible for phenomena such as photosynthesis in plants, where energy transfer can happen across a distance instantly because the system is connected coherently. Oh, what did I do? Is that next? Okay. I just wanted to throw this in here because it's kind of an example of everything I'm trying to convey. So in one of Mandel's books, he talks about implicit and explicit, this framework of life. So really everything is waves. Like, we're not seeing the implicit, that's what our eyes are taking in, and the explicit is what our brains are processing to show us. But the explicit isn't what the world actually looks like or what the world actually is. That's just how we interpret it. Really, the implicit is a much better picture of what the world is actually like. And if you can make that conceptual leap, you kind of understand how important things like electromagnetic fields are, which are constantly around us and interacting with us, even in the way that we hear and see at a basic level. So color puncture is especially effective in a combination with psychotherapy because the treatments can bring up stored emotions and reveal negative patterns. that can be consciously improved. This is similar to what I talked about as memories being stored in the structure of the water and the fascia earlier, so the light can provide information to regulate that. This is a picture of my color puncture tool. On the next page, I'll show you the official one. I have one from another provider, but mine just cycles through all the different colors. The official one is a light, and you insert glass rods to use all the different colors, and there's even more than that are there. This is a picture of like how the treatments will be shown. So it'll give you a color to put on certain points for a certain amount of time. These are just other pictures from one of Mandel's books, kind of taking some of these things to the next level. But you'll see the colored points on different parts of the body. It's extensive. It blows my mind. As a conclusion to color puncture, I want to quote Mandel in his book that I have, like introducing esthetics in 1986. He said, "Light is life. This is not a belief system, but something that is confirmed by science. Specifically, light is present in the communication between cells in the body. An illness occurs when the cells can no longer speak the same language. Giving light to the body has a resonance effect, bringing cells into the same language again and thus supporting the body's natural healing process." I'm close on time. If you have questions, just throw them in there. I don't really have much left. I just want to leave you with some quotes that I've encountered on light. And then I think I made it through. This is crazy. I'm just going to read these quotes. Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems, and then it explodes into this enormous collage of what the present moment looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. So that's an illustration of the implicit versus explicit interaction that happens through the medium of our body. Every part is in communication with every other part through a dynamic, tunable, responsive liquid crystalline medium that pervades the whole body. Here's a quote from John Ott. Shout out to Jacob. "When trace amounts of certain wavelengths of light are missing from your light diet, this can have a staggering effect on your health. In every culture and in every medical tradition before ours, healing was accomplished by moving energy. Treating humans without the concept of energy is treating dead matter. Dead matter." Albert Szent-Györgyi again, the 1937 Nobel Prize in Medicine. He also said at a conference, he said, "What is life?" And then he paused and everyone was like, what is he talking about? And he said, "This is life." And he talked about the way that biologists study the body in such a mechanistic way that they're never going to find life the way that they study the body, ignoring energy. So from the book Invisible Rainbow I'm reading, the author said, "While psychology and medicine has been moving toward the mechanical concepts of 19th century physics, physics itself has moved in the opposite direction." What's interesting is that in medicine and in biology, we study in this very mechanical way. Physics, though, since the early 20th century has studied energy, and we really need to integrate medicine with physics, modern physics. He also said the enduring influence of the concepts of 19th century physics is evident in the numerous materialism-based misperceptions present in the modern mindset, including that of the majority of scientists. I only have a few more here. Cells can recognize extremely subtle differences in electric fields. Noting their waveforms, amplitudes, and frequencies, they then decode them, decide how to respond, and initiate a response. Cells also recognize other communications, other languages from the environment. This sensitivity to subtle communications in the electromagnetic spectrum is not limited to cells. Even enzymes and molecules recognize and process different electromagnetic frequencies. These kinds of oscillations or wave signals make up one of the primary languages used by all self-organized systems. Another Mei-Wan Ho quote here. "Not only is nature an all-encompassing electromagnetic superorganism, but the knower, is also an electromagnetic organism, maximally sensitive and responsive, fully engaged in mind and body, intellect and feeling to other organisms, ultimately to all nature. All living things, from mice to men, from trees to seeds, are molded and controlled by electrodynamic fields. In this troubled age, it gives the comforting certainty that life is no accident and that all of us are integrated parts of the universe. Oh, and that's it. The end. I know I didn't leave a lot of time for questions, but I didn't see too many popping up. And I finished within an hour. I have like a dry throat now, but I did it. Are you all like stunned into submission here? So K is it's a broader industry measurement of the warmth of a light spectrum. There's a lot more information here. I just yeah, I think it's gonna take a long time. You'll have the slides if you have any questions on anything specific. Feel free to let me know. Yeah, don't be so afraid of the sun, I would say. Yeah, it's actually I want to build a light like a light box for photobiomodulation using the frequencies that Tina Carew identified. But really anything with red and infrared, the most common ones I see are like 650, 850. I wouldn't spend a ton on it. I spent between 150 or I think I got it for 150, but I think it's sold now for 200. My red and infrared light. I wouldn't spend a crazy amount on it. And if you want recommendations or something, I may try to manufacture one, but I don't know much about light manufacturing. I've tried to research it a little bit. It's complicated. Yeah, I mostly wanted to just expose you guys to some of this because it was all brand new to me, and I've bought like 20 books and read papers and just like completely dove into this the last 6 months or so. I find it fascinating. This Steve guy is a troll, huh? Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you listening to me ramble for an hour. Yeah, Rory, do you see why I needed some time to put together my light therapy presentation?
I see why. I think you consulted. How many different articles did you consult for this one? You must have like just so many JSTOR articles in your downloads or whatever.
I've got a lot of books strewn about my house right now. Yeah.
Craziness. Yeah, I think we maybe need like a part 2 after people process a little bit. Maybe we can do one of like actually how you could how you practice this at home, or I don't know. There's so much here.
I have some books. There's a book where I have that's very practical light therapies, but I haven't researched it too much because I have some of the specific tools I've spent more of my time, and I wanted to understand the mechanisms behind all this stuff too. So like that's where I started.
Yeah, I also liked the image you included of the infant being like incubated in the blue light, and it just makes me think like, is this going to be more mainstream? I know you mentioned you feel like there's a reason it isn't mainstream, but like, is that going to be changing?
It is already changing.
Yeah.
For sure. It's definitely changing. One book I have, it's just called Light Therapies. It's written by the head of the International Light Association, and he's talking about changes that are already happening. actually the amount of research being done into light therapy and light's influence on the body is growing tremendously in the last 10 and 20 years.
Really interesting.
Yeah, there is some resistance to it, but I mean it really can't be ignored anymore. And we are making a lot of progress on this stuff. So
One sort of maybe like COVID relevant thing is I know that they're now selling red lights to kill bacteria. I don't know your thought on that, but like for your phone, like that's like portable red light thing that you can apply to your phone to kill like bacteria. I don't know if that's
it would have to be there are frequencies of UV light that will kill certain things, but I don't know the research on the specific frequencies or if it
yeah.
kills what it's supposed to. But for sanitizing, there are applications in UV light.
Yeah, so I wonder if we'll see more of that. It's possible. Well, thank you so much, Scott. This is fascinating.